The reason nobody in Ordway ever bid on the telephone exchange was a photograph. It hangs in the front room of the Trask County Historical Society, which occupies the old freight depot on Delaware Street, in a black frame between a picture of the flood and a picture of the last passenger train. It was taken on a bright cold morning in the third week of March, 1974. By a man from the Ordway Bulletin who was standing in the middle of Ash Street with the sun behind him, and it shows 4 men in coveralls carrying a long gray steel cabinet down the front steps of a 2-story brick building and setting it on the bed of a flatbed truck. There are 3 more cabinets already on the truck. There is a 5th one standing on the sidewalk waiting its turn. There is a man in a hat with a clipboard and a boy on a bicycle stopped at the curb to watch, and the whole thing has the ordinary daylight look of a job being finished on schedule. The caption underneath it, typed on a slip of paper by a volunteer in 1988 and never changed since, reads, "The last of it goes out." Ordway Exchange, March 1974. The last of it. Everybody in that town has seen that photograph. It has been reprinted in the bulletin at least 6 times on anniversaries, and it was in the Centennial book, and it was on a placemat that the Kiwanis sold for $2 at the fair for about 11 years running. If you grew up in Ordway, you have looked at it in a dentist's office. And every single person who ever looked at it took away from it the same simple fact, which was that in the spring of 1974, the telephone company came and took its equipment out of the exchange building and hauled it away, and after that, the building was an empty brick box on the corner of Ash and Delaware with nothing in it. That was the settled understanding of the place. It was not a rumor. It was not even a story people bothered to tell, because nobody tells you a thing that everybody already knows. It was just the flat background fact of that corner, the way you know without being told that the water tower is the water tower. And it was wrong in a very particular and narrow way for 51 years. The building itself is not much to look at, which did not help. It is 2 stories of dark red brick with a cut stone water table and a shallow parapet, built in 1921, 62 feet on Ash Street and 40 on Delaware, with a squared-off corner entrance and a row of tall arched windows across the 2nd floor. The ground floor windows were made big and plain in the 1970s when the old storefront was pulled out and replaced with aluminum, and the 2nd floor windows were painted over on the inside with a flat institutional gray, so that from the street they look like 9 blind eyes. There is a name cut into the stone panel above the corner door in letters 6 inches high. And it has been up there long enough that most people in Ordway have stopped reading it the way you stop seeing a wallpaper pattern. It says Trask County Mutual Telephone Company, and then underneath, smaller 1921. Mutual is the word to hold on to. That word is the whole thing, though it took 51 years and 1 retired abstractor for anybody to notice it. The Trask County Mutual Telephone Company was not a company in the way we mean the word now. It was formed in 1904 by 96 farmers and merchants who each put in $25 and a certain amount of labor, because the Bell people were not coming out that far and everybody had gotten tired of waiting. They strung their own wire on their own poles down their own section lines. A subscriber was a member, and a member owned a share, and the shares were listed by name in a ledger, and the board met in the back of the hardware store on the 1st Monday of the month. By 1920, they had 430 subscribers and a switchboard running out of the front parlor of a house on Eiler Street, with the night calls answered by whoever lived there, which for 6 years was a widow named Cordy Sipes, who kept the board in her sitting room and slept in a chair beside it. In 1921, the members voted to build an exchange of their own. They raised the money by assessment $6 a share, and they paid a Kansas City architect a fee of $200 because they had decided they wanted the front of it to look like something, and they put the building up on the corner of Ash and Delaware in 9 months. The business office and the counter and the repair room went on the ground floor. The exchange itself, the switchboard and the frames and the batteries and the girls, went upstairs on the second floor where the windows were, because an operator worked a 10-hour shift and you did not put her in a basement. And when the association deeded that finished building to itself in November of 1921, a lawyer in Ordway named Tobias Hurd sat down with the minutes of the building committee in front of him and wrote the deed the way the members had told him to write it, which is where this whole thing actually begins, though nobody would look at that sentence again for 104 years. The exchange ran for 53 years. It went from Magneto to Common Battery in 1931. It carried that town through 2 floods, one tornado that took the north end of Ordway off in 1952, a diphtheria scare, the closing of the shoe factory, and every fire and every heart attack and every baby that ever came in a hurry in Trask County. Because until well after the war, the way you called for help in a place like Ordway was that you picked up your telephone and a woman. Upstairs at Ash and Delaware said, "Number, please," and you said, "Ines, get me the doctor," and she did the rest. In 1949, the members voted, not without shouting, to sell the plant to the Central Plains Telephone Company out of Joplin, because the toll settlements had gotten complicated and the men on the board were mostly in their 70s by then and tired. The sale carried the building with it. 2 years later, the Trask County Mutual Telephone Company filed its articles of dissolution with the Secretary of State and stopped existing. Central Plains ran the exchange another 23 years with the same board and mostly the same women, and then on a Sunday morning in March of 1974, they cut the whole town over to an electronic switch in a beige metal building out on the Bellefonte Road at 10 o'clock exactly, and 11 operators in Ordway went home for good. 3 days after that, the men came with the flatbed truck, and the man from the bulletin took his picture, and 14 years later, a volunteer typed a caption for it, and that was the end of the matter as far as the town of Ordway was ever concerned, except that the men with the truck only ever went in the front door and only ever worked on the ground floor. Nobody thought to notice that, because why would you? If you are standing across the street watching 4 men carry cabinets out of a building, you are not counting floors. You are watching a job get done. The photograph shows precisely what it shows, which is the toll and repeater equipment and the test desk coming out of the ground floor rooms. And the photograph shows nothing whatsoever about the second floor, and for 51 years an entire town read a caption instead of a picture. The building was sold in 1979 to a man named Farrell Pardue, who opened Pardue Farm and Home in it and ran it for 15 years. He wanted the whole ground floor for merchandise, so he had the old open stair at the back taken out, framed the whole over with joists and plywood, laid vinyl tile across it, and set a bin of hydraulic fittings on top of the patch. If you go and stand in that building now with a flashlight and look up at the acoustic grid, you can still see the outline of it, a square of ceiling that does not match the rest. After Pardue, it was a church for 12 years, Living Water Fellowship, which used the front half and stored folding chairs in the back. After the church, it was nothing. The taxes stopped being paid in 2011. The city of Ordway took the parcel by tax foreclosure in 2016, the way a city does, without wanting it in the slightest, and put it on the surplus real property list. And there it sat for 9 years at a minimum bid that started at $9,000 and got reduced twice, and finally, in the 5th year, was simply struck out and replaced with the words, "any reasonable offer." 9 years of any reasonable offer, and not one offer, reasonable or otherwise. What finally moved was not a buyer, but a neighbor. The Trask Farmers Cooperative has its elevator and its scale on the block behind Ash Street, and every harvest the trucks back up onto Delaware and sit there idling, which is a nuisance and a hazard and the subject of one letter to the bulletin every October since about the year the elevator went in. So in February, the cooperative came to the city with a proposition, and it was a good one. And everybody at the table said so. The cooperative would pay half the cost of taking the exchange building down. The city would pay the other half out of its capital fund. The lot would be graded and paved and striped for truck staging, and the cooperative would maintain it, and the city would own it, and the corner of Ash and Delaware would stop being a liability with a roof that leaked into a wall the fire chief had already flagged twice. The estimate for demolition, abatement of the boiler insulation in the basement, and clearance to a paved pad was $142,000. The council passed the Memorandum of Understanding 4-1. Demolition bids were to be opened at the City Hall at 10 in the morning on the 9th of June. And because the city attorney was a careful woman, and because a parcel cannot be handed to a wrecking ball without one last honest attempt to sell it, the council also directed the clerk to advertise the property one final time for sealed bids to be opened on the 28th of April. The notice ran 3 times in the Ordway Bulletin, in the legal column at the back, in the 6-point type they use for delinquent tax lists and probate notices. It ran the full legal description of the parcel. Because the statute requires the full legal description, and the full legal description of that parcel takes up 11 column inches. 11 column inches of small type that nobody has ever read in the history of the world, except that this time somebody did. Opal Renfrew was 79 years old that April. She lived alone in a white frame house on Iller Street with a screened porch and a bad step, 4 blocks from the corner of Ash and Delaware, in the house she and Delmar had bought in 1969 and where she had stayed the 11 years since he died. She was a small woman, thin through the shoulders, with iron gray hair cut short and plain at the beauty shop every 5th Thursday, and large tortoise-shell reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain because she had gotten tired of hunting for them. She had a son, Wayne, in Wichita, who called on Sundays. She had a walking route. She read the bulletin the whole way through, including the legal column, and this is the part that matters, because there are maybe 200 people in the state of Missouri who read a legal column for pleasure, and every one of them used to do it for a living. Opal Renfrew had spent 26 years as an abstractor at Trask County Abstract and Title on the 2nd floor over the shoe store, which is a job that does not exist much anymore. An abstractor is a person who is paid to read a chain of title all the way back to the government patent and write down everything that ever happened to a piece of ground. Every deed, every mortgage and release, every easement, every lease, every judgment, every mechanic's lien, every probate, every quitclaim from a cousin in Oregon nobody knew about. You read the instrument, the whole instrument, and you summarize it, and if you skip a clause because it looked like boilerplate and that clause turns out to matter, a family loses a farm and your firm gets sued and your name is on the certificate. You do that for 26 years and you cannot stop doing it. Opal Renfrew read leases at the doctor's office. She read the fine print on a raffle ticket. When Wayne bought his house in Kansas, she read the whole closing packet at her kitchen table over 2 evenings and found a driveway easement that ran the wrong direction, and the title company in Wichita sent her a fruit basket. And she thought a fruit basket was a strange thing to send somebody for doing arithmetic. But before all of that, before the abstract office and Delmar and Wayne and the house on Iller Street, Opal Renfrew had been an operator. She was hired in June of 1964, 4 days after she graduated from Ordway High School at the age of 18, by the chief operator, a woman named Inez Dabrowski, who interviewed her in a room upstairs at Ash and Delaware, while behind her 3 women worked a switchboard 16 feet long without ever once looking up. Inez Dabrowski asked her exactly 4 questions. Can you sit still? Can you keep your mouth shut about what you hear? Do you have people who will call you at work? And can you climb stairs, because there is no elevator and there never will be? Opal said yes, yes, no, and yes, and Inez Dabrowski said, be here Monday at 7, wear shoes you can stand in, and that was the interview. She worked that board for 9 years and 9 months. She started on the day trick answering local, and she went to nights, which she liked better, and by 1968 she was working the night trick alone from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, 23 years old, in one room on the 2nd floor above a dark street, with the whole town asleep on the other end of 400 and some pairs of wire. People do not understand what that job was. They think of it as a girl plugging in cords, which it was, in the same way that being a country doctor is writing on a pad. What it actually was in a town of that size in those years was this: you were the only continuously staffed public position in Trask County between the hours of midnight and 6 in the morning. There was no dispatcher. There was no number you dialed for help. There was a woman upstairs at Ash and Delaware, and if you were in trouble at 3 o'clock in the morning, you picked up your telephone, and she was there. And she knew who you were before you spoke, because your line dropped a shutter with your number on it, and what happened next depended entirely on her. Opal Renfrew turned in fire alarms for 11 fires. She raised the doctor 40 or 50 times a year. She talked a man named Verl Hoskin out of a very bad hour in February of 1971 by keeping him on the line for 2 hours and 40 minutes while the deputy drove out from Belfonte with his headlights off so as not to spook him. And she never told a soul about it. Not Delmar, not anybody. And Verl Hoskin lived to be 84 and cut her lawn every summer of his retirement for free, and neither of them ever said one word about why. That was the job. And on the 17th of March, 1974, at 10 o'clock in the morning, a man in Joplin threw a switch, and the job ended, all at once, for every woman who had it. And Opal Renfrew was 28 years old with a high school diploma and 9 years of experience at a thing that no longer existed anywhere. There is one thing about that last morning that has to be said here, because it comes back later, and because Opal Renfrew has never once told it in order. The cutover was set for 10 o'clock on a Sunday. Inez Dabrowski put 4 women on the board from 7 to 10, which was 3 more than a Sunday morning needed, because she said she was not going to have the last shift in the history of that exchange be one girl with her chin in her hand. So they all came in. They wore their regular clothes. Somebody brought a coffee cake. And at 7 o'clock, they took their positions the way they had taken them for years and worked the ordinary traffic of a Sunday morning in a town of 3,900 people, which is almost nothing. A few calls to Belfonte, somebody's daughter in Illinois, the Methodist organist trying to reach the Methodist minister. And at 9 o'clock, they rang the list. The list is the part that people who did not do that job have never heard of, and it is the reason any of the rest of this matters, so hold on to it. Somewhere back in the 1920s, nobody knows exactly when, because the first mention of it in the record is already casual, the operators at the Ordway Exchange started ringing certain houses every morning to see if anybody picked up. It started with 2 of them. Cordy Sipes, who had run the board out of her sitting room, had gotten in the habit of ringing an old man out on the Enfield Road every morning because he lived by himself and his heart was bad, and when the exchange moved into the new building, she brought the habit with her. And Inez Dabrowski, who came in 1938 and ran that board for 36 years. Made it into an institution. By the 1950s, it had a name, which was the morning list, and it had a hinged board that hung on the wall to the left of position 1 with cards clipped to it, and there were rules. You rang at 9 after the business rush. You let it ring 12 times, not 8, because some of them were slow. If there was no answer, you rang again at 9:15. If there was no answer at 9:15, you rang the person named on the back of the card, which was a neighbor or a son or a church deacon, and if there was nobody on the back of the card or nobody answered there either, you sent somebody, and if there was nobody to send, you went yourself, and if you went yourself, you left the board with whoever was on and you took the key. Nobody at the telephone company in Joplin knew this was happening. It was not in any manual. It was not billed to anybody. It cost the company the wear on a ringing machine, and it cost 11 women in Ordway about 40 minutes of their morning, and by 1974 there were 81 names on that board. So at 9 o'clock on the 17th of March, 1974, with 1 hour left in the 53-year history of the Ordway Exchange, 4 women rang 81 houses one last time and wrote the answers in the log the way they had every morning of their working lives, because it did not occur to any of them to skip it. 80 of them answered. Opal Renfrew took the key off the hook and went out the side door and down the stairs and walked 6 blocks in the cold. And what she found and what she did about it is a thing she has never said out loud to any living person. And she came back at 11 o'clock, an hour after the exchange she worked at had stopped existing, to a room where the cords were already dead. Then she went home, and the following week she started looking for work. She waited tables at the Redbird for a while. She did 9 months at the shoe factory before it closed. And in the spring of 1978, a man named Hollis Frame, who owned Trask County Abstract and Title and whose father had been on the Mutual's board, hired her because he needed somebody who could sit in a chair for 8 hours and read without their eyes sliding, and he had a theory that a night operator could do that better than anybody. He turned out to be right about that. She was there 26 years, and the last 9 of them she ran the place, which is how it came to pass that on a Tuesday evening in April. At her kitchen table on Eiler Street, with the light going orange across the sink and a cup of coffee she had already let get cold, a 79-year-old retired abstractor sat reading the legal column of the Ordway Bulletin and came to a notice of sale of surplus real property and read the whole thing, because she always read the whole thing, and got down past the meats and bounced to the tail end of the description and stopped. She read it again. She got up and turned on the overhead light, which she almost never did, and sat back down and read it a third time with her finger going along under the words the way you are taught not to do, and then spend your whole working life doing anyway. Then she sat there for a long while without moving. Here's what she was looking at. The notice printed the description of the parcel exactly as it had come forward out of the record, because the clerk had simply copied it from the tax deed, which had copied it from the sheriff's deed, which had copied it from the deed to the church, which had copied it from the deed to Farrell Pardue, which had copied it from the deed from Central Plains, which had copied it from the deed of 1949, which had copied it from the original deed of November 1921. That is what a legal description is. It is a sentence that gets carried by hand from one instrument to the next for 100 years by people who are being careful not to change anything, and every one of them copies it whole, because changing it is how you get sued. And after a while, nobody on earth is reading it, they are only moving it. And at the very end of it, after the lot and block and the survey call and the reference to the plat book, past the point where a normal human eye has long since given up, sat 64 words that Tobias Hurd had written in November of 1921 at the direction of a building committee of 11 farmers. They read, together with the whole of the exchange rooms upon the second floor and all apparatus, boards. Frames, batteries, instruments, books, cards, and records therein contained, the same being the property of the subscribers, and to pass as an entirety and not in part, and no portion thereof to be severed, removed, or destroyed save by written instrument executed by this association and entered of record. Opal Renfrew read that sentence at her kitchen table, and the first thing she felt was not excitement. It was the small, cold irritation of a professional noticing that a thing has been done wrong for a very long time. Because she knew, sitting right there, three things at once, and she knew them the way you know your own address. She knew that the association that wrote that sentence had dissolved in 1951, which meant that after 1951 there was nobody alive or incorporated on this earth who could execute the instrument the sentence required. The clause had not expired. Clauses do not expire because the people who wrote them died. It had simply become impossible to satisfy, which is a very different condition and a much more permanent one. She knew that in 26 years of running abstracts in that county, she had never once seen an instrument of severance recorded against that parcel, and she would have remembered it, because it would have been an odd thing, and she collected odd things. And she knew, because she had stood in those rooms, what the words, books, cards, and records had been sitting on top of in November of 1921, and had gone right on sitting on top of ever since. She did not sleep much that night. In the morning, she walked to the courthouse. The Trask County Recorder's office is on the ground floor of a limestone courthouse with a rotunda that leaks. And the deed books are in a vault behind the counter, and the deputy on the counter that morning was a young woman named Kayleen Foth, who had been in kindergarten when Opal retired, and who said, "Oh, Mrs. Renfrew," and got out of her chair. Opal was in that vault for 4 days. She pulled the tax deed to the city and read it whole. The clause was in it, copied forward, sitting in the middle of the description like a stone in a stream. She pulled the sheriff's deed, and the deed to the church, and the deed to Farrell Pardue, and the deed from Central Plains. And the clause was in every one of them, unaltered, right down to the word thereof, because every one of those instruments had been prepared by somebody copying the last one. She pulled the deed of 1949, and there it was in typescript on a legal blank. She pulled the original of November 1921, which is in Book 41 of Deeds at page 308, in Tobias Hurd's own hand in brown ink, and read it standing up at the shelf with her glasses pushed up on her forehead. Then she went looking for what was not there. An abstractor will tell you that the hard part of the work is never finding the instrument. The hard part is proving the absence of one, because you cannot search for a document that does not exist. What you do instead is search everything that could possibly contain it and come out the other side empty, and then you write a sentence saying you found nothing, and you sign it. She ran the grantor index and the grantee index for that parcel from 1921 to the present day. Every entry, every year, and there are 104 of those years. She ran the miscellaneous record, which is where a bill of sale would go, and where a release would go, and where the strange things go. She ran the chattel index in the years it was kept separately. She looked at the corporation filings for Central Plains. She wrote to the state and got the dissolution file of the Trask County Mutual Telephone Company, which is 9 pages long and includes a final report signed by 5 old men, and there is nothing in it that assigns or reserves or severs anything. And on the 3rd afternoon, she found the one instrument that anybody had ever bothered to record, and it is the piece that turns the whole thing. It is a bill of sale filed in the miscellaneous record on the 2nd of April, 1974 by the Central Plains Telephone Company and prepared by a law firm in Kansas City. It is 2 pages. It recites the covenant, quotes it in full, which tells you their lawyer had read it and had thought about it hard, and then it conveys from the company to itself as owner of the fee. And for the avoidance of doubt, the toll and repeater apparatus testing equipment, business office furnishings, and counter fixtures situate upon the first floor of the said building, and it says, in a separate paragraph that Opal read 4 times, that nothing herein shall be construed to extend to the exchange rooms upon the second floor or the contents thereof, as to which the grantor makes no claim and takes no action. Makes no claim and takes no action. That is a lawyer in Kansas City in 1974 looking at a covenant written by a farmer's lawyer in 1921, working out that the only body authorized to release it had been dead for 23 years, and deciding, correctly and cheaply, that the safest thing his client could possibly do about the second floor of a building in a town of 3,900 people was nothing at all. Do not touch it. Do not sell it. Do not scrap it. Close the stair, note it in the file, and walk away. So the men came with the flatbed truck, and they took the first floor, exactly what the bill of sale said they could take. And a man from the bulletin photographed them doing it, and a volunteer typed a caption underneath it 14 years later that said the last of it goes out, and an entire town believed a piece of typing. On the Friday, Opal Renfrew came out of the vault at 4 o'clock, walked up Ash Street in a light rain, and stood on the opposite corner for about 20 minutes, looking at 9 painted-over windows on a second floor. Then she went home and got out her checkbook and a legal pad. She wrote the bid in longhand and then typed it on a machine she had kept from the office. Because she wanted it to look like something, it was 1 page. It offered $1,620 for the parcel as described in the notice, together with all improvements and everything the description carried, and it stated that the bidder was aware of the condition of the roof and the parapet and made no request for any repair or warranty. And it stated that the bidder had read the legal description in its entirety. That last line was not necessary. She put it in anyway because she had spent 26 years certifying that she had read things and because some part of her wanted it in the file. She sealed it in a manila envelope and walked it to the city hall on the 22nd of April and handed it across the counter to the clerk, Doreen Van Treese, who took it and looked at it and said, "Is this for the building?" Opal said it was. Doreen Van Treese said, "Honey, that thing is coming down in June." And Opal Renfrew said, "Well, we will see." The bids were opened at the City Hall on the 28th of April at 10 in the morning in the council chamber, which is a low room with a drop ceiling and a horseshoe of desks and a flag in the corner that leans. There were 14 people in the room. Most of them were there for the item after it, which was a variance on a carport. Byron Deal, the city administrator, was there with the demolition packet under his arm, already tabbed, because the pre-bid walkthrough for the wreckers was set for the following Tuesday and he had the sign-in sheet printed. Hollis Frame, who was mayor now and who had hired Opal at the Abstract Office 40 7 years earlier, was there in the middle chair. Renata Sokol-Krug, who represented the 2nd Ward and had run on the elevator traffic and had made the cooperative's proposal her whole spring, was in her usual seat at the end with a folder and a bottle of water. Gail Sturdivant, the city attorney, came down from Belafonte for it. A man from the cooperative sat in the 2nd row. Corey Nabin from the Bulletin sat on the aisle with his phone on a little tripod, and Opal Renfrew sat in the 4th row on the door side with her purse on her knees and her coat still on. Doreen Van Treese opened the box, which is a gray steel box that lives on a shelf in the clerk's office and gets carried down for these things, and took out 1 envelope. And everybody in the room did the small readjustment that people do when a thing they expected to take 4 seconds is going to take 40. She read the name and she read the amount, $1,620. There was a pause of the kind that a small town does very well, which is not laughter exactly and not silence either. Somebody in the back said, well, hell, Byron Deal looked at the clerk and then at the mayor and said, that is not a bid on a building. That is a bid on a lawnmower. Renata Sokol-Krug said, I would like the record to show that the city has a signed memorandum with the cooperative and a demolition estimate of $142,000, and that this offer is 1 1/7% of what the city is about to spend, and that we have a Tuesday walkthrough scheduled. Corey Nabin, who was 26 and had been at the paper 8 months, wrote down the number 1,620 and circled it and looked around the room for a reaction shot. And the only person not reacting was the small gray-haired woman in the 4th row who was sitting perfectly still with her hands folded on her purse, the way a person sits who used to work nights alone. Gail Sturdivant said the thing that mattered, and she said it flatly, without any pleasure in it, because she is a good lawyer and good lawyers do not enjoy this part. She said the notice was published 3 times, it solicited any reasonable offer, it set no minimum. The council directed that the property be offered 1 final time before demolition. 1 bid was received, and it is a bid. If the council does not want to accept it, the council can reject all bids. That is your right. But I want you to understand that you will then be spending $71,000 of public money to demolish a building 4 weeks after refusing $1,600 for it, and somebody is going to write that sentence down. Corey Nabin wrote that sentence down. The vote to accept was taken on the 12th of May at the regular meeting, and it went 4-1, and Renata Sokol-Krug voted no, and said for the minutes that she was voting no because the city had made a commitment to the cooperative and to the residents of the 2nd Ward, and because in her judgment the sale did nothing but delay a nuisance by an unknown number of years. Which was, by the way, a perfectly reasonable position. Almost everything anybody in that room said that spring was perfectly reasonable. That is worth remembering because it is usually true and because nothing in this story is about a villain. Hollis Frame voted yes, and afterward he came around the desk and said, quietly, Opal, what in the world are you doing? She said, I read the description. He said, I know you did. You read every description in this county for 26 years. What are you doing? And she said, Hollis, they never took the upstairs out. He looked at her for a second, and then he laughed, not unkindly, and he said, honey, everybody knows they took it out. It is a picture in the depot. And Opal Renfrew said, I know it is. She paid at the counter on the 15th of May with a check drawn on the Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ordway for $1,620 plus $28 in recording fees, and the deed was drawn by the city attorney's office, and because the city attorney's office prepared it by copying the description out of the tax deed the way everybody had for 100 and. 4 years the covenant went into it one more time, unaltered, right down to the word thereof. The deed was recorded on the 19th of May at 11:20 in the morning in Book 906 at page 151. Doreen Van Treese gave her 4 keys on a wire ring and a manila folder with the fire chief's inspection letters in it and said, there is no power to it, and there has not been since the church left, and the water is shut at the main. And Byron says, do not go in there by yourself. Opal said she did not intend to. The first person she called was Royce Kubiak because there was nobody else to call. Royce Kubiak is 66 and lives out past the fairgrounds and keeps bees badly. He went to work for Central Plains in 1979 as a central office repairman and spent 31 years driving a company pickup between 11 unattended switch buildings in 4 counties. And he is the last man in Trask County who can look at a relay and tell you what it is for. He had also, as a boy of 15, carried his father's tool bag up those stairs at Ash in Delaware. because his father was the maintenance man for the Mutual and then for Central Plains. And there was a period of about 2 summers where Royce Kubiak was probably the only person under 20 who had ever seen the second floor of that building. She told him what she had bought. There was a silence on the line long enough that she said his name. He said, "Opal, tell me the exact words in the deed." She read them to him. He said, "Say the part about the boards again." She said it again. And Royce Kubiak said a word that will not be repeated here and then said, "I will be there in the morning." They got into the ground floor with the second key on the ring. Through the Delaware Street door on a bright, warm morning at the end of May. It was not dramatic. It was a big, low room with a dropped acoustic ceiling and fluorescent troffers hanging dead, a floor of vinyl tile in a pattern that had been fashionable during the Carter administration, and along the back wall the abandoned steel shelving standards of a farm supply store. And in the front corner, a stack of stacking chairs and a plywood lectern painted white and pigeon mess under a broken transom, and the powdery, mineral, entirely specific smell of a building that has been closed a long time, but not wet. Royce Kubiak walked the room once with his hands in his pockets and then stood in the middle of it and looked up. The old open stair had come up along the back wall on the Ash Street side, and he found it in about 90 seconds because he knew what he was looking for. In the ceiling grid, above where a bin of hydraulic fittings had stood for 15 years, there was a rectangle of tile that was a slightly different color and did not match the pattern of the field. He pushed one up on his fingertips and shone a light into the plenum, and there it was, new joists sistered in, running the wrong direction, and above them the underside of a plywood deck, and around the edge of the deck the ghost of the old stairwell opening in the original ceiling framing, a hole 11 feet long and 4 feet wide. Framed off and closed over in 1979 by a carpenter who was making floor space for a farm store and who did not care in the slightest what was on the other side. That was all it was. There is no vault door in this story. There is no chain, no seal, no bricked archway, nothing anybody did on purpose to hide a single thing. A man wanted more room to sell hose fittings, so he took out a staircase, and 46 years went by, and that was sufficient. The only other way up was the old fire stair on the Ash Street side, which is an enclosed masonry shaft with a steel door at the bottom, and the steel door at the bottom is bricked, and had been bricked since 1979 as well. Because the fire marshal will not let you have a stair that goes to a floor with no occupancy and no second means of egress. Royce Kubiak looked at that brick for a while. It is 8 inches of solid common brick laid in the door frame and struck flush and painted. And you can cut it, but it is going to take a day and a saw and a permit, and the whole town is going to watch you do it. Which is when Nadine Ochoa came into it. Nadine Ochoa is 31 and runs Ochoa Tree Service out of a yard on the Belafonte Road with her brother, and she owns the only bucket truck in Trask County that is not the property of the electric cooperative. Opal called her because Opal had been calling her every fall for 6 years to take deadwood out of a silver maple, and because Opal had noticed. The way people who read for a living notice things, that the middle window on the Delaware Street side of the second floor was a double-hung sash with the paint on the inside face only, which meant it was original, which meant it opened or had. They set up at 8 in the morning on the 2nd of June, which happened to be exactly 1 week before the demolition bids were to have been opened, and which was the day the whole thing became public, because you cannot put a bucket truck in the middle of Delaware Street in Ordway at 8 in the morning without 11 people asking you what you are doing. By 9 there were about 30 people on the sidewalk. By 9:30 there were 60, and Corey Naban was there with his phone, and somebody had gone and gotten donuts, because that is what happens. Royce Kubiak went up in the bucket with a flat bar and a cordless saw and a headlamp. Nadine Ochoa ran the controls. Opal Renfrew stood on the sidewalk below in a maroon quilted barn coat that was too warm for the day, with her arms crossed and her chin up. He got the storm sash off first and handed it down. He worked the flat bar under the bottom rail of the lower sash, and it did not move because it had been painted shut on the inside in 1979 along with the glass. He cut the paint line with a utility knife all the way around, 2 passes, and set the bar again and put his shoulder into it, and the sash came up 4 inches with a crack like a rifle, and a puff of gray dust went out of that gap into the sunlight, and everybody on the sidewalk went quiet at once. 51 years of still air came out of that window in one breath, and it went up in the sun. And about 60 people in the town of Ordway stood in the street and watched it go. Royce Kubiak got the sash up to its full height. He put his head and shoulders through with his headlamp on, and he stayed like that, motionless, for 11 or 12 seconds. Then he pulled back out and looked down over the rail of the bucket at the woman on the sidewalk. And his face had gone a color that people who were there still talk about, and he said loud enough that all 60 of them heard it, "Opal, it is all here." It took them until the following Thursday to make it safe to bring her up, because Royce Kubiak refused to put a 79-year-old woman in a bucket at a window ledge. And because Nadine Ochoa's brother pointed out that if the floor up there had been holding a battery bank for 100 years, it was probably holding just fine. But somebody ought to look before anybody walked on it. An engineer came over from Belafonte and went in through the window and walked the second floor with a laser and a moisture meter, and came back out and said the floor was a heavy timber floor built to carry lead acid cells, that it had about 4 times the capacity of anything he would have designed, that there was water damage at the northeast corner under a bad parapet, and he wanted that. Corner shored and stayed off, and that apart from that corner, he would put a wedding reception up there. They cut the brick door out of the fire stair on the Wednesday with a permit, and Ordway watched that too. And on the Thursday morning, the 12th of June, Opal Renfrew went up the fire stair of the building she had climbed 6 days a week for 9 years and 9 months, holding the pipe rail with a work light in her other hand, and came out through the door at the top into the exchange room. Understand what she was walking into. It is one open room, 62 feet by 40, the full footprint of the building, with a ceiling of pressed metal 14 feet up and 9 tall arched windows on 2 walls. And every one of those windows painted gray on the inside, so that the light coming through them is not light exactly, but a kind of even pearl glow, the color of the inside of a shell. There is no direct sun in that room, and there never was, because you do not put sun on a switchboard, and the shades were drawn in 1974, and they are drawn now. The whole space is filled with this soft gray gold luminance, absolutely even, absolutely still, with the dust of half a century hanging in it and turning slowly. The board runs down the middle of the room, 16 feet of it, 5 operating positions, quarter sawn oak, dark with hand oil along the key shelf where 40 women's forearms rested for 53 years. The face of it is a wall of brass jack fields, thousands of holes in neat ranks with the small brass shutters of the line signals above them, and the number strips, and the cords, and this is the thing that undoes people, the cords are still hanging. 300 and some cord pairs, weighted, hanging down in their loops in front of each position exactly the way they hang when a shift ends, dressed and straight. Because Inez Dabrowski would not tolerate a tangled cord field, and the last 4 women in that room dressed the cords at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 17th of March, 1974, out of pure habit, before they turned off the lights and went down the stairs. 5 wooden operators' chairs on casters stand pushed back from the board. 4 of them are pushed straight in. 1 is turned slightly, at an angle the way a chair is when a person got up in a hurry and did not come back. 5 headsets hang on their hooks. There is a cardigan on the back of the third chair, a rust-colored cardigan with a hole in the elbow. At the north end there is the toll board, 2 positions, with a rack of route cards above it. Behind the main board, across the back wall, stands the main distributing frame, 22 feet of it, floor to ceiling, wired end to end with jumper wire in colors, blue and white, orange and white. Running in combed bundles across the frame in loops so tidy that Royce Kubiak, who spent 31 years doing exactly that work, stood in front of it that morning with his cap in his hands like a man in a church. There is the ringing machine on its slate base with the flat belt slack on the pulley. There is the motor generator, and beside it the hand crank on a bracket for when the power went. Painted red with a stencil above it. There is a doorway into the battery room where 60 glass jar cells sit in 2 rows on slate shelves with their lead plates fanned inside them and a skin of mineral oil gone amber on top, and every one of those jars is still standing and not one of them is broken, and the tops of the racks are silvered with the finest gray dust anybody has ever seen. There is a restroom at the south end with an iron cot, a folded army blanket, a hot plate, a mirror and a chair, where the night operator was permitted to lie down between 2 and 4 if the traffic allowed, which it never did. There is a blackboard by the door with the shift schedule for the week ending the 16th of March, 1974, still on it in chalk. 11 names down the left side, and under the last column somebody has written in a round, steady hand, "Thank you, girls." And there is not one footprint anywhere on that floor. Not one. 51 years of dust lying flat and unbroken from the door to the far wall, up to the legs of the chairs, over the key shelf, over the cardigan on the back of the third chair. 62 feet by 40 of undisturbed gray, with 9 gray windows glowing above it. Opal Renfrew stood in the doorway with the work light hanging down at her side and did not go in for a long time. Royce Kubiak came up behind her and stopped, and Nadine Ochoa came up behind him and stopped, and the 3 of them stood in that doorway and nobody said anything at all. Then Opal took 1 step in and stopped and looked down at the print her own shoe had made, which was the first mark on that floor since the last woman out closed the door, and she said, to nobody in particular, in the flat voice of somebody holding themselves together with both hands, "Well, somebody had to." She walked to position 3. She did not touch anything. She stood behind the chair with the cardigan on it for a while, and then she went past it to position 1 at the end, where the chief operator sat, and she looked at the wall to the left of it. And that is where she stopped being all right. The morning list was still hanging on its nail. It is a hinged board of 1/4-inch plywood, 2 feet by 3, painted gray, with 4 columns of spring clips screwed to it in rows, and clipped into those rows are 81 cards of stiff cream board, 4 inches by 2.5, each one lettered by hand with a name and a line number, some of them in ink gone brown and some in pencil, in the handwriting of 9 different women across 5 decades. They are not in alphabetical order. They are in the order you would ring them, which is by exchange group and then by how far away help is. Opal Renfrew stood in front of that board and read the names down the first column and then had to put her hand flat on the key shelf, because she knew them, not some of them, all of them. She had rung those 81 houses at 9 o'clock in the morning for 9 years, and there were people on that board she had spoken to 1,200 times and never once met. Behind the board, in the room the chief operator used, which is 10 feet by 12 with a frosted glass door, there is a wooden card cabinet against the long wall, 36 drawers, oak, with brass card holders on the fronts. And in those 36 drawers, filed by line number, is a card for every subscriber the Ordway Exchange ever carried. Every one. From 1921 to 1974. Those cards are not a phone book. A phone book tells you a number. These tell you what the operator needed to know, written on the card by whichever woman found it out. Added to and crossed out and added to again for 53 years, and reading them is the strangest experience anybody in Trask County has ever had, because what you are holding is a town's whole nervous system written down in pencil by women who were not supposed to be doing it. Mother deaf, let it ring 12, son answers after 6. Heart, if no answer at 9 ring Enfield store, they can see the house. Do not connect long distance after 9 at night. He will call Kansas City and cry about it in the morning. Baby due end of March. Doctor is at the lake on Sundays. Use the Belafonte number. Oxygen in the house. This one first. She works nights at the plant. Do not ring before 2 in the afternoon. She is asleep. He is not to be told about his brother by telephone. Ring the pastor. Widow. Rings us at night sometimes just to talk. It is all right. That last one appears on 11 different cards in 4 different hands across 30 years. It is all right. Somebody in that room decided at some point that this was a thing worth writing down and passing to whoever came next, and whoever came next agreed. And it went on being written for 3 decades, on a card, in a drawer, in a room nobody was ever supposed to see. And in a plain oak cupboard under the window there are the logs. 53 of them, 1 book per year, marbled boards, cloth spines, 1921 through 1974, standing in order. The log is where they wrote the calls that were not ordinary. Every fire, every doctor, every ambulance from the funeral home, because in those years the funeral home ran the ambulance. Every night somebody rang the operator because they did not know what else to do. The tornado of 1952 takes up 9 pages in the book for that year in 3 different hands because they worked in shifts for 2 days and one of them wrote standing up. There is an entry from January of 1936 that says, in full, 9:40. Fire, Coin Place, Enfield Road, rang 11, all went. It burned anyway. And there is a column on every page of every book on the right side for the morning list, a short column, rung, answered, and when it was not answered, what was done. Royce Kubiak got the book for 1974 down off the shelf and set it on the key shelf at position 1 and opened it near the end, and the 3 of them stood over it. The last page with writing on it is dated the 17th of March, 1974. The regular calls of that Sunday morning are on the left in Innes Dabrowski's handwriting, and on the right is the morning list column, and it says at the top, rung 905, and then a run of tally marks and initials going down the page, 80 of them, and then 1 line at the bottom, and the line reads, Sokol H. Fisk Street. No ants 905, no ants 915, no card on back. O went, and then in a different pen added later in a hand that had gotten unsteady, O. Back 11. She had fell in the night and broke her hip. Alive, ambulance took her. O stayed with her the whole time on the kitchen floor. And then the last line ever written in the log of the Ordway telephone exchange, and it is in the same unsteady pen, and it is set apart at the bottom of the page with a line drawn under it, cut over 10:02. Board dark. 53 years and we did not miss one. Opal Renfrew put both hands on the key shelf of position 1 and stood there with her head down. She was 28 years old on that Sunday. She had walked 6 blocks in the cold with a key in her coat pocket and found a 70-year-old woman she had never laid eyes on lying on a linoleum floor in a nightgown between the table and the stove, conscious, freezing, unable to move, who had been there since about 2 in the morning, and she had put a coat over her and put a pillow under her head and could not lift her and would not leave. Her, and had sat down on that floor and held her hand and talked to her for an hour and 15 minutes until the funeral home ambulance came. And then she had gone back to work at a job that had ended while she was sitting on that floor. She never told anybody. Not Delmar, not Wayne. Not because it was a secret, but because of the 4 questions Inez Dabrowski asked her when she was 18 years old. And the second one was, can you keep your mouth shut about what you hear? And Opal Renfrew had said yes, and she had understood that answer to have no expiration date on it whatsoever. For 51 years, she had carried, privately. The small worn-down thought that it had probably not mattered very much, that somebody would have found the woman, that she had been a girl in a coat, sitting on a floor, being no use. And there it was, written down at the bottom of a page in a book, in a room nobody had entered since, in the handwriting of a woman who had been dead since 1986. O stayed with her the whole time on the kitchen floor. Nadine Ochoa, who is 31 years old and cuts down trees for a living and had come along that morning mostly to make sure nobody fell through a floor, went and stood at the far window with her back to the room for a good while. The bulletin put it on the front page on the 18th of June, 4 photographs and 1,100 words. And Corey Naban, to his everlasting credit, led with the cornfield and not with the price, and by the following Wednesday the story had been picked up in Kansas City and then in a magazine and then everywhere, and the phone in the white frame house on Eiler Street began to ring in a way it had never rung in 51 years, which Opal Renfrew found, she said later, extremely ironic. The city's first move was not a good one, and Byron Deal would tell you so himself now. On the 23rd of June, the city sent a letter signed by the administrator taking the position that the personal property upon the second floor had not been conveyed by the deed, that the city had never intended to convey it, that it had not been valued or advertised, and that the city reserved all rights in it and requested that nothing be removed pending review. Gail Sturdivant, the city attorney, had not written that letter and had not seen it before it went out, and when she did see it, she drove down from Belafonte on a Friday afternoon and sat in the council chamber with the administrator and the mayor for an hour and a half. What she told them was this: the clause has been in every instrument in the chain since November of 1921. The city copied it into its own tax deed in 2016. The city published it 3 times in the newspaper in April. The city's own attorney's office copied it into the deed the city delivered in May. There is no recorded instrument of severance in 104 years. And the only entity that was ever authorized to execute one dissolved in 1951. Central Plains Telephone looked at this exact question in 1974 with a Kansas City firm and put their conclusion in the miscellaneous record where anybody could read it, and their conclusion was that they had no claim. The city, Gail Sturdivant said, cannot unknow a sentence it printed in the newspaper 3 times. She also said, and this is the part that ended the discussion, that if the city litigated this, it would lose, and that the discovery in that case would consist almost entirely of establishing that nobody in the city of Ordway had read the notice the city itself published, and that she was not going to be the lawyer who put that on a record. The city withdrew the letter on the 29th of June. The cooperative, to be fair to them, never made a claim at all. The manager came and looked at the second floor in July and stood in front of the distributing frame for 10 minutes and then shook Opal's hand and said his grandmother had been an operator in Sedalia. The offers were the other thing, and they came fast, and some of them were serious money. A dealer out of Illinois named Sheldon Prusak drove down in the first week of July and walked that room for 3 hours with a flashlight and a notebook. And he was polite and knowledgeable, and he did not lowball her, which she respected. He offered $95,000 for the board, the toll positions, the frame, and the ringing machine, crated and removed at his expense, and he said honestly that he could probably place the board with a museum in the East and that it was the most complete Magneto-era common battery installation he had personally ever seen standing in its own room. She thanked him and said no. A restaurant group in Kansas City wanted the cord field and the jack panels as a wall. $60,000. A man who makes videos wanted the glass cells and offered to come and film the removal. And on the 30th of July, a woman called from an online outfit that sells what she called vintage paper ephemera and made an offer of $40,000 for the card cabinet and its contents. And explained cheerfully, at length, and without any apparent sense that she was saying anything unusual, that the cards would be sold individually, framed in lots by handwriting, and that the ones with what she called good content would go for the most. Opal Renfrew asked her to define good content. The woman said, "You know, the ones with a story on them. The dramatic ones." There was a pause on that call which Opal's son Wayne, who happened to be visiting and was standing in the kitchen doorway, describes as the longest silence he has ever heard his mother produce. Then Opal said, "Those are not stories, they are people, and most of them have grandchildren living within 9 miles of this telephone, and no." And hung up. Wayne asked her afterward, carefully, the way a son asks, whether she understood that she had just said no to $195,000 in 1 month on a fixed income in a house with a furnace that was 22 years old. And his mother said, "Wayne, I paid $1,620 for it. Anything I sell out of that room. I am selling something I did not pay for and did not earn and was only ever handed by accident, and I would be the 4th person in this to walk in and take what was easy to carry. 3 of them already did that, and one of them was a photographer, and he did not even mean any harm. She did take the money for one thing, later." And it is worth mentioning because it is the exception that shows the rule. In October, she sold the empty motor generator set, the one piece of equipment in that room that had been installed in 1961 and replaced nothing and recorded nobody, to Sheldon Prusock for $11,000, and she put every dollar of it into a scaffold license and a mason to rebuild 40 feet of parapet on the northeast corner, which is the thing that had been letting water into the floor since about the year the church left. The lookup days started in September because Nadine Ochoa's mother suggested it and because it was obvious the moment somebody said it out loud. They put 4 folding tables on the ground floor under the acoustic grid, and they brought the drawers down one at a time, 6 at a time. Never the whole cabinet at once, and volunteers in cotton gloves sat behind the tables, and the doors were open on Ash Street from 10 to 4 on Saturdays, and people came and gave a name and stood there while somebody went through cards. They came from Belafonte and Enfield and from 4 states. On the second Saturday, the line went out the door and down past the barber shop. And Nadine Ochoa's brother set up a canopy, and somebody made lemonade, and the Methodist women sold pie, and it stopped being an event and became, for about 11 weeks, simply what Ordway did on Saturdays. A man of 81 named Del Cordray found the card for his parents' line and read, in pencil, in a hand nobody could identify, "Boy is deaf in one ear, speak up. He is not being smart with you." Del Cordray said he had been told his whole life that he was a mouthy child. A woman found her grandmother's card, and the note that said, "Rings us at night sometimes just to talk. It is all right." And she took it to the window and looked at it for 10 minutes and came back and asked whether she could sit down for a minute. A man in his 60s found the card for the farm he grew up on and the line that said, "Do not put through collect calls from Tulsa," and understood, standing there at a folding table at the age of 64, exactly what his mother had been doing about his uncle for 11 years. And on the 4th Saturday, the 11th of October, A woman in her 50s came in on her own at about 2 in the afternoon and gave the name Sokol and the line number for a house on Fisk Street. Renata Sokol Krug had not been to the building. She had voted no in May, and she had said what she had said for the minutes, and she had stuck to it because she is not the kind of person who unsays a thing because it got unpopular. The volunteer found the card. It is in Ines Dabrowski's handwriting, and it says on the front the line number and the name, and then lives alone since Vern died. Bad and cold weather, no family in county, mourning list. And then the volunteer who had been trained to do this said, "There is a log entry attached to this one. Would you like to see it?" They brought the book for 1974 down and opened it on the table to the last page with writing on it, and Renata Sokol Krug read the bottom of that page standing up in the middle of her own town on a Saturday afternoon with about 40 people around her buying pie. Her grandmother had lived another 19 years. She died in 1993 in a bed in a house on Fisk Street at the age of 89, and her granddaughter was 23 years old when it happened and had spent a great deal of that year in that house. The family had always known there had been a fall in the 70s and always known she had been found, and had never known by whom or how or that anyone had sat on that floor for an hour and a quarter. There is no dramatic scene here. Renata Sokol Krug did not cry in front of anybody, and she did not make a speech. She read the page twice, and she asked whether a photocopy was possible, and the volunteer said yes, and made her one, and she folded it into her purse and thanked everybody and went out. She came back at 9 o'clock on the Monday morning to the house on Eiler Street with 2 coffees and sat on the screened porch with the bad step for 2 hours, and what those 2 women said to each other is not on the record and is not anybody's business. What is on the record is that at the council meeting on the 14th of October, Renata Sokol Krug moved that the city of Ordway commit $1,000 from the capital fund toward a new roof on the Exchange building, contingent on matching private money, and it passed 5-0, and the money was matched in 9 days by 460 people in a town of 3,900. She never explained the change of position in public, and nobody who was at that folding table on the 11th of October ever asked her to. On the 6th of February, Opal Renfrew recorded one more instrument. It is a deed of gift from Opal M. Renfrew, widow, to the Ordway Exchange Trust, a Missouri nonprofit corporation, conveying the parcel together with all improvements and all apparatus. Boards, frames, batteries, instruments, books, cards and records therein contained, the same to pass as an entirety and not in part, and no portion thereof to be severed, removed, or destroyed save by written instrument executed by the board of the trust and entered of record. The 1921 language copied forward one more time, deliberately, by a woman who spent 26 years learning precisely how much one sentence can do if nobody troubles to delete it, and who fixed the one flaw in it, which is that this time there will always be somebody alive who is authorized to sign. The trust has 3 stated purposes in Article 2. To maintain the building, to keep the exchange room as it stands, dust and cardigan and chalk and all, and open it to any person who asks, and to operate what the articles call the morning call. That last one is the thing. 4 days a week at 9 o'clock in the morning, volunteers sit at a folding table in the old business office on the ground floor of that building with a modern telephone and a printed list, and they ring people in Trask County who have asked to be rung. And they let it ring 12 times, not 8, because some of them are slow. If there is no answer, they ring again at 9:15. If there is no answer at 9:15, they ring the name on the back of the card, and if there is nobody on the back of the card, somebody goes. They started with 9 names. There are 106 on the board now. The board is a hinged piece of plywood, 2 feet by 3, painted gray, with 4 columns of spring clips, and it hangs on a nail on the wall, and it is not the original. Because the original is upstairs on its nail, where it belongs, and will stay there. Opal Renfrew is 80 now. She takes the Tuesday shift. She is slow on the stairs and does not go up them much anymore, but she goes up on the 17th of March every year and stands at position 1 for a while by herself. She paid $1,620 for that building. The town had a signed agreement to knock it down for $142,000 and had gotten within 7 days of opening the bids to do it. And what she actually bought, which nobody who sold it to her knew they were selling, was 64 words at the tail end of a legal description that 11 farmers dictated to a country lawyer in November of 1921 because they wanted it understood permanently in the record that the exchange belonged to the people on the wire. It was in the book the whole time. Everybody in Ordway walked past it for 104 years. Somebody finally read to the end.